If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made.
All right, so coming out of that video, we're talking about leadership here. We're in week 2 of this David series, and man, I loved just tackling this whole idea that no matter where you are in your family or organization or business or church or whatever we're talking about, it doesn't matter where you are. Leadership is not really about rank or position. Leadership is all about influence, and we highlighted that the first week. Now this week we're getting into leading from the top down. Let's say you do have a position, let's say you do have a rank or a title. How do you actually effectively influence people when you do have a position, when you are the one who's in charge of other people? Today we're going to jump into a story of David. We've been tracking through the life of David, and I think it's important, like we did last week, look at a little bit of a timeline of his life. And so if you want to follow along with me, the timeline of David's life, it starts back when he's born. That happens in 1040 BC. We jump ahead to 1025 BC. He's united by Samuel as the future king, but he's just a child at that point. We jump to 1020 BC, and he defeats Goliath. And then in 1010 BC, he's crowned king of Judah. In 1003 BC, he's crowned king of the united Israel. In 1000 BC, David and Bathsheba, something happens there, right? And then in 997 BC, David's son Absalom revolts. And then in 970 BC, David dies. Now, in this huge timeline that we're looking at, we are going to highlight a story found in this timeline from when Absalom, David's son, revolts against his own dad. And I think it's important to note, as we look at this timeline, David doesn't see the timeline like we do. I think it's important to realize that David is in the same situation that we find ourselves in a lot of times in life when we don't know what's coming next, right? Like we don't know the outcome of this. We don't know the 50,000-foot view of our lives. We just see maybe the next few steps or the next step that we need to take. And it's the same with David, and his life had to be like a walk of faith, trusting in God in sometimes very contradicting circumstances. And yet through it all, we see that David really trusts in God no matter what circumstance comes his way. And I think God doesn't just put people in leadership and then they're automatically leaders. I think one of the things and the characteristics about leadership and influence is that you don't just get it. It's almost like it's a learned behavior. It happens over time. And over time, you gain a little bit of more influence by the results that you have and how you invest in people's lives, and you become a better and better leader or influencer as time goes on. It just doesn't happen overnight. And God makes people into leaders by building their character and perseverance. See, over time, the circle of influence spreads, and you begin to influence more and more people by who you are and who you're becoming. And so last week, we kind of highlighted on the chart all the circles. Remember, it kind of looked like a Christmas tree, really? And so today, we're going to be looking at that same chart, but what I've done is I've flipped it, because what I have found is that a lot of us, we dream about being the one in charge or having the position or title. We want to be that person. But then when we actually become it, like we talked about last week, and being the captain of the hockey team, remember that? When you're actually in that position, you realize that, man, this is not the same as we thought. Now, last week, we kind of looked at how the leader is kind of far out ahead of the pack, and kind of talked about maybe equating this to like a marathon or the Tour of France, and the leader's way out in front. But in fact, what I see leadership is the actual opposite of the Christmas tree. It's like an upside down Christmas tree where the leader is right here. And what I find about leadership is that the higher your rank is or the position is, and if you're an effective leader, what ends up happening is your responsibilities, they get higher and higher. You are responsible for more and more things. In fact, other people in the organization or the business or the church or your family, their decisions actually, they represent you. And the buck stops with you. You are the person who's in charge, and so you have to bear the responsibilities for other people's actions and decisions. And so the further you get in a business or organization, your responsibilities, they go higher and higher and higher. But you know what happens at the same time as that? Your rights decrease. Now, some people have glamorized their idea of leadership in that, man, if I was only at the top, I could do all the things I wanted to do. I could have the say over everything, but it couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, if you are a great, great leader, your rights decrease more and more the further you go in the organization. For example, here at the church, we have rules that we've all agreed to as staff, right? And some of these rules, they're not sin, but the appearance of them kind of takes the rights away from us, and so we don't do them. For example, one of those is the consumption of alcohol, right? And so none of the staff, we don't do that, not because it's a sin, but because the more responsibilities you have, especially in serving God, you don't want the appearance of something to affect your leadership abilities. Or it's the same thing with driving in a car. You will never see me in a car with another woman by ourselves who is not, my wife or Scarlett who we're looking after, or my mom or Emily's mom or someone who's like related to me. You will never see me in a car, not because that's a sin, but because my rights as the leader of the church, or one of the leaders of the church, it decreases as I go higher in capacity of leadership and understanding that. And so let me tell you, when you are leading and you have the title or the rank or the position, it is a lonely place. Because there's far more people who are in the business and who are in the organization, who are in the family, who are not the leader. And they don't relate in the same way as you do. If you look at this chart, the chart shows that one person is all by themselves, right? And everyone else is kind of on top of them or beside them or behind them, depending on how you want to look at it. But it's kind of a lonely place, and it's a place full of pressure. In that upside-down Christmas tree, it all falls on one person. And when the pressure is hard, a lot of times what ends up happening is that the leader breaks. The pressure's too much to handle, and they can only take so much. And when you don't deal with it properly, everything crumbles, including your influence and your leadership. And so have you ever been, maybe you're here today and you are in charge. Maybe you are the parents in your family. Maybe you are the manager or the business owner. Maybe you are in leadership in the church or in the hockey club that your kids are a part of, or the dance troupe, or whatever it is. Maybe you are in charge. And have you ever felt the pressure that I'm talking about? That the weight of the business or the organization, it rests on you, and that's overwhelming feeling. And have you ever felt that this kind of feeling that you're worried or you're anxious and you feel like life is crashing down on you, and enemies are converging and conspiring against you, and maybe they're gossiping about your leadership, or maybe your inadequacy, and you believe those lies, and it's just kind of overwhelming and chaotic, and you say, you know what, I can't do this. I can't go any further. I can't handle this kind of pressure. I can't be the one who's in charge. That's what we're tackling here today. And if we look at Psalm chapter 3, that's kind of where we're camping out. Psalm chapter 3. This is a psalm that David writes. And it's a moment in his life that we highlighted in that timeline when his son is he starts a coup. He leads a coup against him. Now, Psalms are an interesting thing because most of them, they have this aspect of like, I can't handle this. This is difficult. I'm having a hard time with this. I'm anxious about this. But then they also contrast that with like, God, you are my provider. You are my help. You are my refuge. You are my safety. You are my strength. And you see that contrast taking place as you read through the Psalms, which is a great point here, because you can be honest before God and claim the realities of what's happening, but you can also claim who God is and the reality of his character and how he's provided in your life. And so, Absalom, he's a young man of contempt and hatred, and he sees what is not his, that's the kingship, but he tries to go after it anyways. And Absalom, he wants his dad's position. He's going to do anything he can to get it, include actually killing his dad. Now, his dad, he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to handle this situation. All he can really do is pray for his son that he wouldn't get caught up too much in this and that his son wouldn't die, even though his son's after his life. See, the people once loyal to David have turned against him, and they're actually mocking his commitment to God. And they're shouting all kinds of things at him. They're mocking his trust in God, that God's not going to help him. And in spite of that, in spite of his son trying to kill him, in spite of the coup that's going against him, in spite of his closest allies turning against him, and people mocking his commitment to God, you know what he does in the midst of that? He trusts them. He trusts God. He leans into him. He places his hesitations and he places his worries in the one who can handle them. And he's confident. He knows that he could help. He reflects on the past and what God did for him, which allows him to move forward into the unknown. And what we see happening is that God actually rescues him out of that situation. And he restores the kingdom. And when it's time, Absalom isn't crowned king, but Solomon, David's son, is, right? David's enemies, they're put to shame, and some of them are put to death. And Absalom, his son, is killed by his own vanity. And for a lesson for those of you who have long hair, you should cut it. Because Absalom, where he finds himself, is riding one day and his hair gets caught in a tree. And there he is, hanging from his hair in a tree. And one of David's soldiers finds him and spares his life in that moment. See, leadership these days, man, it's tough. It's tough because if you're anything like me, you are critical about a leader before you are positive about them, aren't you? It's like you automatically default to the negative about someone who has authority or rank or position. Maybe it's because we've been burned so many times. Maybe we're just cynical about it. But leading people is ever so difficult because you have to earn their positivity. It doesn't just come naturally. And times are hard. And organizations and businesses, they're stressed. And employees take on too much and too many hours. They don't get paid enough for what they do. And everything is changing at rocket pace. And the job of a successful leader is to take all of those difficulties and drive a group of people, whether it's your family or your church or your workplace or your organization, and to drive those people to do something good into a single mission and into a single product. And that's not easy. And so what we have here today, I want to point this chart for you. It's a chart about ambition. And so look at this chart, and you will see that there's two sides of this thing, and then a line that joins them together. And what this chart is talking about is in the pressure and the stress that comes in leading people and trying to influence them, and maybe what David experienced. in the midst of all that pressure, oftentimes people who are in charge, they handle that pressure in the wrong ways. And they get insecure about their position or their title. And instead of influencing people, they influence them for the negative. And so on one side of this chart, you see that when you are in charge, sometimes you have you gravitate towards killing people's ambition. You kill them. You don't let them do great things because you rule with an iron fist and you need to govern them, you need to rule over them, and you kill their ambition. In fact, I've heard it described as kibosh. You kibosh their plans and their abilities, and you don't let them do anything. And they don't reach their full capacity because you're insecure as a leader, and you kibosh anything that they want to do that's good. See, the other side of that is that you are so insecure as a leader, and you are not aggressive in killing people's ambitions, but you have fallen victim to God ever using you as a leader, and you take hands-off leadership, and people, because of that, they run wild with ambition. And they don't have any kind of governance. They walk all over you. They do whatever they want because you have never set the parameters of leadership in their lives. And you've never led properly. See, either end of the spectrum, when you're not leading well, you allow ambition to die or run wild, and it's a free-for-all, and it's a problem either way. And so what I want to do is I want to walk through Psalm chapter 3 with you. We're just going to take bite-sized morsel of this thing because I think in the midst of the pressure, David has some truths, some nuggets of truth to tell us in that. And so follow along with me. We're going to read from the Message version of this thing. It's before you hear Psalm chapter 3, starting at verse 1 and 2. And here's what it says. In the midst of Absalom running after him, God, look, enemies past counting, enemies sprouting like mushrooms, mobs of them all around me, roaring their mockery. No help for him from God. You ever feel like that? It's absolutely crazy. Like there will be time when you are in charge and you have the position in the rank and you are leading out of that when the odds seem to be against you. And people are mocking you. And the task seems too great, too high, and you feel like people are gossiping and you're kind of believing those things and people are against you. And in those times, a leader might feel that there's more negative voices than positive ones. And David is in that situation. His own son wants to kill him. Both on the outside, it's easy to believe the lies, but on the inside, it's easy to believe the lies as well. But what David does here, and what any great leader does, is that he understands that what he's feeling is the reality of the situation at the time, but it's not always the reality in the timeline. What he's going through is real. But in the scheme and the overarching timeline of what God is doing, it's not real. And there's a 50,000-foot view of the situation. And God has great plans in store for David, but in the moment, it's difficult to realize those things. Let's go back to verse 3 and 4. It says this, "But you, God, you shield me on all sides. You ground my feet. You lift my head. With all my might, I shout up to God. His answers thunder from the holy mountain." See, the leader, regardless of the naysayers, must remember the vision, the resolve of their role within the business or the family or the church or the organization. Right? Because in this case, David, he's not unrealistic here. He knew the situation is gruesome. He knew the reality of the situation is hard. He knows his son's trying to kill him. His greatest allies are turned against him. But he also knows that he has a testimony of what God has done in the past when he killed Goliath, when he fought off bears. He knows how God has worked in his past. And so he dwells on those things, and the calling of his life outweighs the situation he finds himself in. And I think that is important. Because great leaders lean into their calling more than they lean into their situation. For example, the reality in my life is that here's what I know to be true. I am not very good at organization. I am not very good at like, honestly, at like public speaking and being in front of large groups of people. I really know that there's often days that I have no idea what I'm doing. I know that I can quickly walk through the halls without talking to people because I'm an introvert. I know that I have big problems me in leadership? No, that doesn't even make any sense, right? If I look at the reality of myself, it's condemning, it's convicting. But what I need to do in my struggle is I compare that struggle of who I am with the time that God has placed me here. And so one of those things has to weigh out my inadequacies or God's calling. And what great leaders do is they lean into God's calling more than the situation, more than the inadequacy, and God does amazing things because he uses people in spite of people, right? Let's jump into 5 and 6. It says, I stretch myself out, I sleep, then I'm up again, rested, tall and steady, fearless before the enemy mobs, coming at me from all sides. And so David here, he takes action. It's an important action in the circumstance, right? Because he goes to sleep. His son's trying to kill him. People are against him. It's a huge amount of pressure. It seems like chaos. And the guy goes to bed. What is up with that? How do you even do that without taking like sleeping pills or something? Like you're going to bed in the midst of this craziness? It's nuts to think that way. And yet he's taking a step in realizing that, you know what? I'm at the limit of myself. This is in your hands. I'm going to bed, God. And when I wake up, you got to deal with this because I can't. It's in your hands. And so I'm going to bed because I need to look after myself. But when I got up, you better have done something because I'm turning it over to you. That's essentially what he's doing here. And I think great leaders, they rely on the power of God because they know their limits. They know what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. And in the moments of time that they're not capable of doing things, they press into God and they lean into God and they trust him and they're able to go to sleep or to find rest even in the chaos. Let's jump to verse 7. It says, up, God, my God, help me. Slap their faces. First his cheek, then the other. Your fist hard in their teeth. Probably my favorite verse in the Bible, right? Like you don't hear that, his fist in their teeth too often in the Bible, but this is the verse, right? Verse 3, David woke up with a passion. He goes to sleep and he wakes up and he's like on fire, man. He's so excited. He's so passionate about what's going on. He has a new resolve. He has experienced revival in his heart. He's ready to move forward and to accomplish something great for the kingdom of God. And I can almost imagine those around David being like, what has gotten into this guy? Because people want to follow leaders who have great conviction in the cause. They do. Oftentimes, leaders are crazy, right? They're almost so convicted about the cause that it's annoying to everybody else. You know what I'm talking about? It's kind of like, I think about preaching. Like there are people who come to Southgate and they don't believe in God, but they come. And I think part of the reason they come is because they want to see a guy stand up there who really believes in something that they don't and is willing to talk about it for a half an hour, right? Like these people they believe in this, and that's like compelling to see someone who's so sold out for something that I actually don't believe in. That's compelling to watch somebody, and this is exactly what's happening in David. David rallies this, and they rally around the leader because he has conviction in the cause. Which leads me to the final here, verse 8. Real help comes from the Lord, it says. Your blessings clothe your people. See, David assumes his rightful place as the leader. He begins to invest in other people. And as David looks to God for his strength, the people look to him for theirs. And so it's kind of a hierarchy category here where the people are looking to David for guidance, but David has this constant flow of wisdom because David is looking to God for guidance. And it's this stream of wisdom that's passed through David onto the people because people look for a leader that has constant connection with God. He's connected because he's always getting filled. She's always getting filled. And so there's always a stream of wisdom and conviction and passion because they're being fueled, and in turn they can fuel everybody else, right? And so great leaders, they have a consistent connection to God. Now, I talked about kibosh earlier, this idea of kiboshing things. And do you remember Seinfeld? I mean, you might have watched Seinfeld. You might have been a huge Seinfeld fan. We see the kibosh actually being used in this episode. Let's roll this clip here.
Leave a message, I'll call you back, thanks.
Jerry, Joe Davola. I have a hair on my tongue. Can't get it off. You know how much I hate that? Of course you do. You put it there. I know what you said about me, Seinfeld. I know you badmouthed me to the execs at NBC. Put the kibosh on my deal. Now I'm gonna put the kibosh on you. You know I've kiboshed before. And I will kibosh again.
And so we have the word kibosh. Do you actually know what it means? It's a Hebrew word. Let me break this down for you. The word kibosh, it means to put an end to something or dispose of it decisively. For example, you put the kibosh on a deal. You put a kibosh on a deal. Like, I'm kiboshing this thing, right? But the word a lot of people don't know is kibosh. It sounds a lot like kibosh, but it's different. See, kibosh is another Hebrew word, and its definition is this: to subdue, cultivate, and organize something in such a way that it thrives, it grows, and it flourishes. For example, fill the earth and subdue it. See, if you are a leader, you are either a kibosh leader or a kibosh leader. You're one of them. There's no middle ground. You are one of those two things. And if you are a kibosh leader, then man, you are living on the edge of this chart. You are living far to the left where you kibosh people's ambitions, where you kibosh people's ideas, you kibosh their development into leaders themselves, or you're living out kibosh on the other end of the spectrum where you've just given up on leadership and you haven't leaned into your calling, and so you let people walk all over you. You might have the title, but you don't have the influence. You might have the position, but you don't hold the authority. You might think you're leading, but you're not leading anybody. And to be honest, nobody respects you. You've never really captured their ambitions. See, the thing to realize is that God actually never invented kibosh. He only invented kibosh. But many of us have turned from kibosh leaders to kibosh leaders. And the result is sin. Because kibosh finds its root in sin. And those of you who have turned into kibosh leaders have at the root of your leadership sin. And God calls us to be kibosh leaders. All right, and so we're going to jump into this kibosh chart that we looked at earlier, but let's unpack this new version of the chart and see where we fit in and maybe what God is leading us to. And as you look at this chart, I want you to realize that God wants us to live out the kibosh He's put inside of us. See, living it out under His authority and for His glory, because that's the way that He's designed you. And so as you look at this, I think you need to realize that you have ambition because you were created with the drive to create things, to contribute, to influence the things around you. Killing ambition will create negative consequence in the people you oversee, but also in your own personal life. I think you need to realize that God names the ambition inside us, and He calls that kibosh. To kibosh is to bring something under our control so that we can make it more effective and better for God's glory. Over time, the kibosh God has given you, it's somehow been hijacked by the kibosh, by sin. And to kibosh is to bring something under your control for your own good and your dominant authority. And finally, if you kibosh, If your kibosh is passive, not dominant, it leaves people waiting on authority. It's waiting for them to lead, and they can't do anything because they don't really know who's in charge. And that's abdicating our responsibility as someone created in God's image. And so take a moment and reflect on this chart as we close.